Hey guys, this is Derek Duplessis, host of Purpose Rockstar. It's a podcast where we interview people who found purpose in their career in all kinds of fields. Today's interview is with Dave Schmelzer, a good friend and CEO of Blue Ocean Faith. He's an atheist turned pastor that's bringing together the secular culture and religious culture and trying to have a meaning of meaning type of conversation, a meaning of life conversation. It really doesn't happen that much. And we actually talk about it through the prism of his story. I know you'll enjoy it quite a bit. I learned a lot and I've known him for quite some time.
Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we all have those sort of aha moments like, oh, okay, this is some type of epiphany. I'm going to follow this thing. What was your aha moment on your journey?
I have, you'd asked that in advance, and I realized I could have really large-scale aha moments. So, like the whole aha moment I had in college when I realized that the whole plan of life given to me by my parents I didn't believe in. That was an important aha moment. I've had small kind of professional aha moments along the way that might only be of interest to people pursuing my very narrow profession. But one of those that comes to mind is when our church was first going to start. I had not actually anticipated leading a church. I still thought I was there as a playwright who was helping out with a church. But when I suddenly realized I was going to be leading this new fledgling venture, I started reading up on and learning from people who had started churches, obviously, since that's what I was now doing. And one aha moment I had was realizing that the central way in my tradition people tried to communicate through preaching or through kind of what the role of speaking was made no sense whatsoever in the very secular, thoughtful setting that I was in Cambridge. And it was obvious to me almost from day one as I kept hearing more and more about the philosophy of how you're supposed to communicate in that role. I just thought, this is completely crazy. Nobody I know would go for this, and yet it was the only thing being taught, at least in my circle. And so I thought, well, I think I'm just going to jettison everything everyone else is teaching and go with my gut on what I think is more helpful. Did that and was regarded as this renegade doing these crazy things, only to discover years later when I read up on secular public speaking that what we sort of stumbled into doing was not innovative. It actually was what had been being taught in secular public speaking settings for 80 years. It just in the church world, they had just not spoken to each other. So the insights in the secular world had never even been known by anyone in the church world. I didn't know anybody who knew the most common teaching points in the secular public speaking world. And I realized, wow, maybe we should be talking more to each other because we're sort of reinventing something that is to the detriment of churches.
Just boil it down for our audience. What was the one big takeaway that you got from that aha moment?
Well, in specific terms, the preaching insight at the time was you just talk about the history of a Bible passage that you're looking at and communicating to people. You don't tell your own personal stories because, in the words of kind of my tradition, those are subjective, but you're trying to teach the objective truth of God. I felt right away, that's crazy. No one's going to want to follow me into some sort of abstract world. Here people are going to have to know if I'm telling them they need to do something because God says you'll have a better life if you do, then the obvious question is, have I in fact tried to do that thing, and how did it go? That boils down to experiences, and it struck me as obvious that would be where I would start. That was hugely condemned as being, narcissistic or me-focused or just all sorts of very loaded judgmental language against that philosophy. And I think it was reading Dale Carnegie's The Quick and Easy Way to Effective Speaking, where his basic message is find something you're really passionate about and is really awesome, tell in passionate terms why you think it's awesome, interpret what you have to do to get that good thing you've just said, and then wrap it up. It's kind of his method. And I realized, that's pretty much what I've been doing. It's just never, that would have been roundly condemned in church circles when I was starting off.
Wow. Well, let's take a trip to your current travails and your work with Blue Ocean. Talk a little bit about what was the impetus from being at a really successful church that's built from the ground up, that's really innovative and sort of touching the secular world, and now going into this new oeuvre, if you will. How did that come about?
Maybe let me give you a recent anecdote and then back up from there and see if that helps frame it. So it's always very difficult to tell people what I'm doing now because it's so new that I'm talking to a lot of churches, I'm doing some conferencing, so I do some speaking in various settings. I am in on a lot of webinars trying to help start a different sort of conversation with people who are interested in doing it. So I'm doing this, and I'm trying to get a website together, and as I mentioned to you earlier, talking to smart marketers about how to do such things and start a different conversation in our country and that sort of stuff. I'm doing all of that. But what it's all about is very difficult to nail down. And I had an experience where I was traveling from my new home in Los Angeles to the Bay Area, San Francisco area, to do a conference. So very short flight. And I'm on the flight, and I sit down. It's a puddle jumper plane, so it's just rows of two. And I sit down next to a woman about my age, and I'm the sort of person, I'm not one of those people who's chatty on a flight. I'm like most people on flights where at most I might say hello to the person next to me, and then I get down to whatever book I'm going to read or whatever's going to happen next. But this woman was quite social and quite skillfully social. And so I sat down with her, and she said, "Oh, are you traveling to the Bay Area? You know, are you going home or are you going away for work?" I said, "Oh, I'm going away for work. I live in Los Angeles, so I just moved there." And she said, "Oh, really? Well, what did you move for?" I said, "Oh, I moved for a job." And she said, "What's your job?" And I think, we've hit the nub of the very difficult question. And I said, "Well, you know, I actually was a pastor of kind of a large church in Massachusetts for about 18 years. But then I moved to take over as the executive director of a new nonprofit." And, of course, she said, "What does it do?" And I said, "Well, maybe the way I'd put it is it's a nonprofit that's trying to help people talk about the most significant things in life with their friends." And she said, "Wow, that's interesting." And she said, "Actually, I have a circle of friends because my oldest son has a very rare experience. It turns out, is a high-level executive with a biggie tech company in the Silicon Valley." And she said, "My oldest son has had the same group of friends since like kindergarten, and that's really rare because a lot of transients in the Silicon Valley. But they stayed together, and that means we've gotten to know all their parents, and the parents have actually met together as a social group for more than a decade now, and so I have this really robust circle of friends." And I said, "Oh, and you brought that up because you guys talk about the most significant things in life?" And she says, "No, I wish we did. How do you do it?" And so I said, "Oh, okay." And so I told a story about a gathering I'd done in Cambridge with some people who were kind of church-going types, and that's about a third of the group, and about two-thirds were people who weren't church-going types, but they were all friends, about 50 people. And we had a fun evening out to talk about the meaning of life together, with the goal that people could talk to their friends about what was most meaningful to them. And I was sort of the floor show, where I told a bit of my story about how I came from atheism to an experience of faith, how that helped me find meaning. But I also brought a friend of mine who talked about his journey of growing up secular, or actually Orthodox Islam. I'm not sure he ever really believed it. And then how he, through just his journey of life, had embraced atheism and found meaning that way. And he's really smart and thoughtful and great. And so he told his story. And then we had questions to each other, just not to debate each other, but just to kind of ask more information. And then people turned to their friends in the group, and they said, and the people they'd come with, they're good friends, and they said, "So, did you resonate with anything Dave said or Omar said, or is that not your story of finding meaning, and what connects?" And I told this woman on the plane, one really interesting story was a friend of mine had been teaching in the Boston public schools for 40 years, and she brought like 4 colleagues and their spouses with her and her husband to this event. And one of her colleagues turned to her husband and said, "You and I have been married for 37 years. I don't think I know your answer to that question. I mean, where do you find meaning?" And he said, "Yeah, we never really talked about it." And so they started talking about it, and they realized that they didn't particularly find their current jobs, which they'd done for decades, meaningful. And they really had never put it on those terms. And so they immediately, after this gathering, took a leave of absence from both of their jobs, and they realized that what they wanted to do was do development work in the Dominican Republic. And so they were, even as I spoke, on leave in the Dominican Republic doing development work. But they said to my friends who brought them, "When we come back, can we continue this conversation?" And so The other three couples and my friends had all done a weekly gathering to talk about kind of meaning of life issues in sort of a structured way ever since. I tell this to the woman on the plane. She says, "This is remarkable." I said, "How so?" Well, I had noticed earlier that she was reading a piece of fiction, a novel in Spanish, though she's Caucasian American. And I said, "Oh, do you speak Spanish?" And we talked a bit. And she then said, "Well, I'll tell you why I'm reading this. I don't find meaning in my job as this high-level executive in this tech firm. I don't know how to talk to my husband about it, really, but I want to move to the Dominican Republic to do relief work." I said, "Seriously?"
Get out of here.
She said, "This is remarkable." And I said, "You can't talk to your husband about it. Why not?" She says, "I don't know how to bring it up, and he's got his stakes in this thing." And I said, "Your circle of friends, do you talk about stuff like this?" She says, "I wish we did. In fact, one of the couples, the man's a minister, like you." This woman said, "I'm not a churchgoer. I've never been a churchgoer. We're completely secular." But she said, "There's a minister in our group." I said, "Wow, did you ever talk to them about why he's a minister? Or, obviously you really like these people. You've been meeting with them for a decade plus, so you like them as people. Have you ever found out what got him into the ministry trade and why he's doing it and, just connected on that level?" She said, "No, we didn't know how to bring it up. So he doesn't bring it up and we don't bring it up. We don't talk about it." I said, "Would you like to talk about it? I mean, in your heart of hearts, would you like to find out and connect with him on that level and the wife on that level?" She said, "I would." And she said, "What I need from my friends is models because I feel like I'm doing this radical thing. I can't tell anyone about it, and I don't know any models." And what happened in that gathering, Dave, you were talking about in Cambridge, was that those people got models. That they suddenly heard from you and Omar, and they gave them permission to talk about things that even in their marriage they didn't have permission to talk about. And they discovered they were in this group with friends, and they all had similar stories, and because of those models, they could actually make really positive steps in their lives. Without that, I don't know how I would do that. And so we finish up on the plane, and she said something like, "Wow, thank you for the most dynamic conversation I've had in months." And I said, "Well, thank you. You're the one who brought it up. I was just going to read a book. The gift you gave me was connection, which is really all I'm trying to see happen among people around the most important things." So long anecdote to say, how did I get into this? I think what I discovered is, as much as I enjoyed all my many years of helping what I think is a vibrant and awesome church community get solidified in Cambridge, I realized in the end it's that element of it that was most important to me. It was finding ways to connect people who would be certainly in places like churches, but who would be anywhere, to be able to actually have permission and skills and the ability to talk about whatever's the most important stuff to them with the people who matter most to them, and to see if good things could happen. And I just found that to be a very compelling thing. Now, how to do that and how to help in that is a challenging thing. By this point, I had started talking about this stuff to a bunch of my pastor friends, and some found it, interesting and helpful, and they could pick up interesting tips from what we were doing that would help their churches do this a little bit better. But other pastors said, "No, I want to give my whole life to this in my churches. I want to make my churches about that. That sounds fantastic." And so we've given resources to probably 200 or 300 churches right now. And I'm talking closely to the point that I will travel to these churches to maybe 60. And that was enough to get us thinking, well, we're at least a few friends who are really into this. Maybe we can do this together and see if something good will happen. And so that was enough ultimately to convince my wife Grace to say, "I think you should just pursue that and see if that could work." So that's how we ended up doing it.
Well, that's an awesome story. It's a great way to anchor what you're doing. I'm just sort of in awe of the coincidences in life, and just some people say everything happens for a reason, but that was a nice round bow. So thank you very much for that.
There's more to that interview. Yeah, more. And you can find all of it at purposerockstar.com. Link is right there. Yeah, right there. Yeah, right there. So it's really, really awesome that you can go to purposerockstar.com. If you're one of those on-the-go Apple people, you can check it out on iTunes. There's the link. And for my non-Apple people, I'm going to make sure there's a link on Stitcher somewhere next to me. So you got iTunes, Stitcher, and purposerockstar.com. Tell your friends, tell your family. We're on Twitter and Facebook, and somehow we'll be on LinkedIn. I don't know. But at least we'll be on Twitter and Facebook. And one final favor. Pursue your purpose. It needs you.
Joseph Campbell, the big question is whether you're going to be able to say a hearty yes to your adventure.